HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Man Who Made Things Out of Trees by Robert Penn. Read by Robert Penn.
Prologue. Venus of the Woods. The Ash for Nothing Ill. Edmund Spenser. The Fairy Queen. Book 1. I grew up under an ash tree. It stood over the gate that led from my childhood garden to the fields where my brother and I played out our fantasies. To dash past the elegant, slim-hipped, sweeping form of that ash in winter, and to flash beneath its airy canopy in summer, was to be transformed into a colonel or a king, a knight or a wizard. That ash was, for many years, the gatekeeper to my dreams. I can't remember as a child ever making the connection between that tree and many of the things I loved. I don't think I even knew that my prized Dunlop tennis racket, my hockey stick, my cricket stumps and bails, the rocking chair in my brother's bedroom, and our toboggan were all made out of ash wood. Yet that tree somehow stuck with me. Ever since then, I have instinctively looked for ash trees in the woodlands and fields, and even in the urban landscapes where I have lived. The presence of the tree was somehow braided into the long journeys I have made around the world. It may even be that this tree was a cardinal point, a lodestar that brought me, at the end of my journeying, to live with my family in a house within a small woodland on the edge of the Black Mountains, South Wales, in a landscape similar to that which I knew as a child, a place where ash grows abundantly. The woodland is on a south-facing slope. Fields and moorland enclose it on two sides. The Aru stream marks the southern boundary. Mixed deciduous trees, including rarely planted species, are arranged haphazardly. Perhaps trees have stood here for a very long time, but it would be wrong to look at this woodland as something eternal and unchangeable. A woodland only represents the natural order of things at a particular moment in time. When we moved to our house over a decade ago, no one had raised an axe or swung a billhook here since the Second World War, when much of the woodland in the area was felled to provide timber for the war effort. It was a dark, tangled thicket with a canopy of leaves as carefully stitched as a Welsh quilt. The light was thin, the air was restricted, the woodland was somehow lifeless. I was unsure about what to do with my wood. Then I reread a Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold, the early American environmentalist. He wrote, "I have read many definitions of what is a conservationist, and written not a few myself, but I suspect that the best one is written not with a pen, but with an axe." And, tentatively one winter, I started to coppice, the ancient woodland management practice of cutting trees back to the ground level to stimulate regrowth. I felled the old, bulging hazel stools along the field boundaries. I thinned out the weakest trees, rendering new vigour to what was left. I created glades. I planted oak trees. I left standing dead timber and rotting wood on the ground. Birds began to nest in the piles of brash. Wild flowers, a few wood anemones, celandines, stitchwort, yellow archangel, lords and ladies, woodland violets, foxgloves and bluebells sprung to life. As I cleared the smaller trees or underwood, the taller trees, the single-stemmed timber trees called maidens, began to emerge. The skeletal character of individual trees was revealed, the muscularity of the oaks, the stanchion-like alders along the stream, the silver birch with their flamboyant mops of claret-coloured twigs. Most conspicuous of all in the dormant wood were the ash trees. Cast in tender light and naked of leaf, they were grey-green barked, sparsely branched, tall, slender and austere, with twigs that rose and fell and rose again at their tips to end in the distinctive witch's claws which scratched against the pearl-grey sky. Ash wears the winter with a grace that no other tree species can match, hence its nickname, Venus of the Woods. The ash, or genus Fraxinus, one of 24 genera in the Oleaceae family, includes some 43 species, according to Dr. Gabriel Hemery, author of The New Silver, and they grow within the temperate and subtropical regions of the Northern Hemisphere. 3 species of ash are native to Europe. Of these, European or common ash, Fraxinus excelsior, is by far the most widely distributed and important. Common ash grows from the Atlantic coast of Ireland across Europe to the city of Kazan, 500 miles east of Moscow. The northernmost limit of its distribution is the Trondheim Fjord in Norway at 64 degrees north. The eastern boundary traces the river Volga to Crimea and the Caucasus. The southern edge of common ash's domain starts around 37 degrees north in Iran and takes a rough line through Dalmatia, Italy, and southern France to the Pyrenees. On the Iberian Peninsula, common ash only grows in the mountains. As a general rule, common ash is a tree of the mountains in southern Europe. Further north, it is a tree of the valleys and plains. In Britain, ash is the third most common broadleaf tree, after oak and birch. It thrives best on deep, fertile loam over outcrops of carboniferous limestone, ideally on well-drained northern and eastern slopes, where the atmosphere is moist and cool. Ash won't grow on waterlogged sites, but it will tolerate a wide range of climatic conditions, provided the soils are suitable. It grows better in mixed woodland than in pure plantations and is frequent in hedgerows. Ash is also tolerant of air pollution, making it a popular tree in urban parks and gardens. Ash can even survive where there is almost no soil. It grows like scrub on bare limestone rocks in upland parts of Yorkshire and Derbyshire, shooting from chinks in the paving. Normally vigorous and dense-rooted, ash makes significant demands on easily available nutrients in the soil. While it is exacting in this respect, ash is generous in others. It is aristocratically late to leaf. The feathery canopy of an ash tree in late spring and summer is fragile and airy, casting a gossamer shade, which permits plenty of light onto the woodland floor. This encourages a rich diversity of ground vegetation, commonly including oxlip, wood anemones, meadowsweet, ransoms, and the wild flower that grows in sweet-smelling ponds of mauve and has the power of Prozac on the British collective consciousness in spring, bluebells. Ash trees begin to bear good seed crops at around 30 years old, with maximum seed production at 40 to 60 years. The elliptic-winged seed vessels, known as keys, appear in spring and grow over summer. In autumn, they turn brown and hard. Finally, strong winds and occasionally children pluck them from the branches and scatter them considerable distances. Ash trees produce millions of these seeds, which can result in staggering displays of self-propagation. Ash is the largest single contributor to natural regeneration in British broadleaf woodlands. Ash is also a pioneer species and quick to invade vacant ground. Ash seedlings are shade-tolerant and can live in a dwarf state for several years, waiting for a gale or the woodman to fell a neighbouring tree and let the light pour in. On the best sites, growth is then rapid. In good conditions, ash is more productive than oak. Trunks of 6 metres in length and 40 to 60 centimetres in diameter at breast height are reached in 50 years. Growth slows after 60 years or so. The bark of young ash trees is grey-green, smooth, and often overlaid with a tapestry of lichen and moss. With age, the bark cracks to form an irregular pattern of fluted ridges and vertical fissures. Ash bark is less susceptible than the bark of other broadleaf species to stripping by grey squirrels, who cause untold damage to trees in Britain Ireland and Italy. The flower buds, sooty black, ebullient and flattened at the tip, are unlike the buds on any other tree. They appear impatiently on the previous year's shoots in winter, providing a ready means of identifying the species. Short, dense, greenish-white or purple clusters of flowers are produced in April, though not every year. The species has both male and female reproductive organs. Individual trees will display a range of genders over successive years, including male, female, and hermaphrodite. Why this is so remains a mystery. After a few weeks, the stamen flowers shrivel and fall, leaving the seed chambers. The compound pinnate, from the Latin word pinnatus meaning feathered, leaves, comprise pairs of leaflets placed opposite each other on a central stalk, usually with a single leaflet on the end of the stalk. The leaflets are lance-shaped and 2 to 5 inches long with toothed edges. They are dark green and smooth on top and paler underneath. Occasionally, the single leaflet on the end of the stalk is absent. The relative rarity of this led to the popular belief that an ash leaf with an even number of leaflets brought good luck. In the Middle Ages, young girls in the north of England hoping to meet a husband would traditionally pluck ash leaves with an even number of leaflets and keep them in their left shoe. Single-stem ash trees can live for up to 200 years. Coppicing can extend the life of an ash tree up to 400 years or more, and there are many examples of wonderfully misshapen, gnarled, ancient ash stools across Europe. In woodland, ash forms a trunk free of side branches to a great height, often with a substantial girth. In favoured sites, trees can grow to a height of 45 metres. Throughout civilization, though, common ash trees have most frequently been felled and used long before they reached this sort of size. In fact, and most significantly, no other widely distributed European broadleaf tree becomes so useful so early in its life. Ash wood is pinkish white and disturbingly like human skin when freshly sawn. It dries into an attractive, pale, creamy white timber. Though second in value to oak for much of history, ash, of moderate weight, strong, elastic, easily bent and readily worked, has always been more versatile and functional. Human beings have used ash to make ladders, tent pegs, butcher's blocks, boat hooks, bean poles, looms, bobbins, sieve rims, fishing rods, landing nets, clothes pegs, clothes props, crutches, crates for transporting food, scantlings for stretchers, orthopaedic frames, and umbrella handles. During the Middle Ages, ash was also used for joists and beams. The best blocks for pulleys and the stays for bells in church towers were made from ash. Ash makes excellent walking sticks and staffs. For much of history, children have known that ash makes first-rate catapults. It makes attractive panelling and flooring too, and was once a popular choice of timber for pit props in coal mines. Ash has been employed to till and cultivate the land for millennia. It has been used to make ploughs, harrows, and wheelbarrows. Ash made the best handles for spades, shovels, scythes, forks, hammers, hoes, rakes, reaping hooks, and hop poles. Barrel makers or coopers made hoops for casks from ash, while it was also common in vernacular chair making. Ash leaves are palatable and nutritious to animals. In many parts of Europe, the dried leaves are still fed to livestock in winter. Ash was formerly one of the most widely used medicinal trees in Europe. Its diuretic, laxative and anti-rheumatic properties made it commonplace in cures. Sailors carried crosses of ash for protection at sea, and there was a widespread belief well into the 19th century that ash trees could cure warts. Ronald Hutton, my old history tutor and an authority on pagan Britain, has noted that ash features more frequently in British folklore and superstition than any other tree species. Since at least Roman times, ash leaves have been infused in water with yeast and other ingredients to make a mildly alcoholic drink called frenette. It is still made and drunk in a few rural parts of France and Belgium. Ash has been used to make paddles for at least 6,000 years. The Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen had sledges constructed from ash on his successful expedition to the South Pole in 1911. The finest polar sledges are made from ash even now. Ash was exhaustively used in the manufacture of sporting goods, hockey sticks, hurley sticks, polo sticks, tennis rackets, squash rackets, badminton rackets, kites, parallel bars, cricket stumps, skis, snowshoes, toboggans, snooker cues, and baseball bats. Actually, baseball bats in the USA are made from American white ash, Fraxinus americana, rather than common ash, but the two species are anatomically very similar. Even under a microscope, it is hard to tell between them. Ash has contributed significantly to keeping man on the move since the dawn of civilization. For at least 4,000 years, the rims of wooden wheels have been made from ash. Before steel, the vast majority of carts, chariots, and carriages also had axles and shafts made of ash. Early ancestors of the bicycle were made from ash. Coaches and then car bodies were built around ash frames. Ash was extensively used in boat frame building and even in the manufacture of aircraft. In military history, ash has been of equally paramount importance. It made excellent bows, spears, and pike shafts. In Homer's epic Iliad, Achilles' spear was made of ash. It was the first choice of timber for the production of lances in the Roman army. The black squalls of bodkin-tipped arrows that fell out of the sky and wreaked havoc among the French knights during the great battles of the 100 Years' War, like Crécy and Agincourt, were commonly made of ash. The best wooden arrows are still made with ash shafts today. John Evelyn, the eminent 17th century diarist and author of one of the earliest treatises on forestry in the English language, published 350 years ago, Silver, or a Discourse of Forest Trees and the Propagation of Timber in His Majesty's Dominions, was emphatic about the importance of ash. In planting a whole wood of several kinds of trees, every third set at least should be ash. Henry John Elwes, botanist, forester, and co-author of a monumental work of scholarship, The Trees of Great Britain and Ireland, published in 8 volumes between 1906 and 1913, considered ash to be the most economically viable of all British timber trees. William Cobbett, the great politicking farmer and campaigning journalist of the early 19th century, wrote, "We have no tree of such various and extensive use as the ash. It therefore demands our particular attention, and from me that attention it shall have." Beyond a handful of experts, though, ash has never attracted the widespread acclaim it deserves. It has never drawn headlines, plaudits, and the attention of poets in the same way oak has, for example. It was never the timber of kings. It was never used to make stately furniture, build vaulted cathedrals, or construct Her Majesty's ships. Yet, in considering the innumerable and important historical uses, I began to wonder if ash might be the tree with which man has been most intimate over the ages. You could argue that the maintenance of a continuous supply of ash has been a strategic necessity, a foundation of domestic life, and a concomitance to the promotion of mankind across Europe from prehistory almost until the present. Out of curiosity, I began to ask more and more people what they knew about the ash. I questioned woodmen, farmers, housewives, publicans, the postman, relatives, lawyers, plumbers, and total strangers I fell into conversation with on trains. A tiny minority of the vox populi I canvassed could name more than 5 historical uses. A handful recalled the tennis rackets, partly made of ash, which they held in their youth. The farmers all mentioned tool handles. The overwhelming majority of people I asked, though, could name only one use for ash: firewood. Ash makes excellent firewood, but really? Is that it? Ash is one of the greatest gifts with which nature has endowed man in the temperate regions of the planet over the course of human history, yet it is reduced in our minds today to a material you burn. How could something so integral to our daily lives for so long be forgotten so quickly? I decided the best way to learn more about the ash tree was to fell one. Once the idea had germinated in my mind, it grew quickly. I would find the tree in a wood close to my home. It would be milled at my local sawmill. The best timber would be distributed to artisans and makers to be converted into artifacts and products. I could get a writer's desk and a table made. I would turn some of the less valuable timber into panelling for my office and worktops for my kitchen. There would be chopping boards, bowls, the rims or fellies of wooden wheels, spatulas, arrow shafts, catapults, tent pegs, coat racks, laths for coracles, and a paddle. I could saw the larger branches up for firewood and kindling and use the smaller branches to make charcoal. I could even smoke food with the sawdust. The brash and some of the branches would be left behind on the woodland floor to slowly rot away and eventually return to the earth as humus. Every part of my tree would be used. A zero-waste policy would fence the project to exalt the worth of a single tree. How many different uses could I get from one tree, I wondered? 10, 20, 30, more? No tree grows in anticipation of being felled, sawn, planked, planed, turned, sanded, drilled, moulded, routed, and burned. In considering the legion applications of ash timber, though, you could be forgiven for thinking nature actually designed it to satisfy the diverse needs of human beings. As my idea formed, I started to read about the distinct properties of Fraxinus excelsior. At first, I found the mechanical or strength properties of wood to be an impenetrable subject. Woodworking is far from being a numerically exact science. When we use timber, we depend on judgment and intuition as much as on engineering principles. I rang an acquaintance of mine, Jez Ralph, who has a company advising businesses on the properties of timber. Wood is an incredibly complicated material. Curiously, we're only just beginning to work this out now, he said. It struck me that we are still trying to get to the end of a ball of thread that Mesolithic carpenters had begun to unravel 6,000 years ago. They were among the first to appreciate the physical characteristics inherent in different species of wood and to employ them in producing a variety of functional wares. I wanted to look closely at the most important mechanical properties of ash: cellular structure, density, cleavability, elasticity, speed of growth, plasticity, and something called toughness, with reference to the key artifacts and products I commissioned. The simple story of one tree would be set in the present, but be about the past, about the ancient accord between man and ash. It might also stand as a work of advocacy for the future, I thought. We need to recalibrate our destructive impulse with respect to nature, with our needs. I wanted to make a case for the continued and better use of the ash tree as a sustainable resource. I also wanted to highlight something our ancestors implicitly understood: that the pleasure we take from things made from natural materials is an extension of the pleasure we take from nature itself. My idea was beginning to take root. Boyishly, I gushed it out to my wife one evening. She looked unimpressed. Her eyebrows arched. "Do you know a wheelwright?" she said. "Do you know a toboggan maker, or even a bowl turner? Do they still exist? This is the beginning of the 21st century, not the middle of the 15th. And don't you need to know a great deal about timber? I can see a large pile of very expensive firewood at the end of this venture. Perhaps there'll be enough wood left over to make the coffin you're going to bury yourself in." I decided not to mention the idea again. Nor did I say she had hit on one thing I would not be making from my ash. Elm was traditionally used for coffins. I set off quietly at dawn the following morning with the dogs to search for my tree. It was an Elizabethan winter. The countryside was clamped by cold. The north-facing glacial cirques, scarps and ridges that make up the distinctive skyline of the Black Mountains looked alpine. On the lanes, great gargoyles of snow clung to the sod banks and the hawthorn hedges. The cold had come early and swiftly, sweeping out of the north, deadening the land. The water pipes in the garden froze overnight, the songbirds disappeared, and the earth turned to iron. The snow came next. It fell in big flakes at night without noise, transforming the landscape. Next day the fields looked like tundra. The trees had suddenly grown old. What my wife said was true. I didn't know much about timber, but I did know roughly what tree I was looking for. An ash with a clean, straight stem or trunk that I could saw into planks of varying thicknesses and take to artisans. I also wanted a tree with a large canopy to give me plenty of wood to work with. No tree in my own small woodland met these criteria, so I started my search in Strawberry Cottage Wood, which I helped manage as part of a community woodland group. "I don't think you'll find your tree in there," said Joe Binns, the owner and a friend, as he was putting out feed for his sheep. He was right. Trees fight for a share of light and for nourishment. Every twist in the trunk and every buttress is a show of aggression and defence. In the absence of man's intervention over several decades, the big ash in Strawberry Cottage Wood had arched, bowed and bent to gain the light. There wasn't a single straight tree of good girth. Joe suggested I try Mark Morgan, another local farmer, with a wood exclusively of ash. It was a beautiful wood, high up on a steep hillside, bordering a ridge of heather moorland in the Lantoni Valley. The trees were planted orderly, straight, and in the freezing mist, watchful. However, they were too young for my purposes. Mark, who I knew well from our collaborations on stage in the local pantomime, smiled wryly and said, "You've saved yourself a hell of a job getting a stick down off that hillside." He too was right. I wasn't just looking for the ideal ash tree. I needed a tree I could easily get to the side of the road and onto a lorry to transport to the sawmill. Back at home, beside my wood-burning stove, I rang all the farmers, sawmill managers, woodland owners and tree surgeons that I knew. I cold-called forestry management companies and estate managers. Some sucked their teeth and said that no one wanted good ash anymore. Others humoured me. A few were helpful. The list of woodlands I was to visit in the hope of finding my ash tree grew longer as the winter strengthened. One of the delightful curiosities of Britain is that every wood has its own name, like the villages and the great houses they are often moored to. I excite myself by learning the names of the woods on the ordnance map E.M. Forster wrote. Many of these names are routine.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?